Welcome to the deep dive. You've given us your sources, and like always, our job is to pull out the really key stuff without making your head spin. Today, we're heading into, well, a pretty murky area, Soviet intelligence.
Yeah, we're looking at parts of Viktor Suvorov's Inside the Aquarium, the making of a top Soviet spy. It came out back in '85, and it gives this pretty rare look inside the GRU Soviet military intelligence.
Exactly. So our mission today is to try and understand the GRU world Suvorov shows us. We're talking, intense secrecy, how they found people, the kind of training they went through, and just the beginnings of what they actually did. It's a peek behind a curtain they tried very hard to keep closed. And helping us make sense of it all, we've got our expert here. Okay, so let's start with this secrecy thing. Just how deep did it run in the GRU?
Well, Suvorov makes it sound like secrecy wasn't just a rule, it was everything, their whole existence. He calls their headquarters the Aquarium, and it had these extreme laws.
Right. The one that just jumps out is a ruble to get in, two to get out. That's stark. And then the detail about the only way out being the crematorium chimney, it really feels like a one-way trip. Did he give any sense of why it was so hard to leave? Was it just about stopping leaks or something more?
He doesn't really go into specific examples of people trying to leave in these bits we have, but just having that brutal law hanging over everyone, that's a massive deterrent, right? It forces total commitment, or at least you act totally committed. What really stands out is how he compares it to the KGB. The KGB apparently had millions of volunteers, people happy to inform. The GRU, zero volunteers.
Zero. That feels wrong somehow. Why wouldn't they want volunteers?
Their thinking, according to Suvorov, was all about that absolute secrecy. I mean, how would a real outsider even know who to volunteer to? The organization was just too hidden, so anyone volunteering would immediately look suspicious. Maybe a plant from another agency. He says they'd be arrested straight away, interrogated hard. That level of paranoia really shows how isolated they were.
It really does.
Yeah.
So the secrecy wasn't just outwards towards enemies, but inwards too, keeping the circle incredibly tight. Suvorov talks about their headquarters at Kodinka having transparent walls, which sounds confusing.
Yeah, it's not literal. He explains it meant anything said inside those walls could never get out. It's a metaphor for, like, total internal lockdown, but zero visibility from the outside. And his own story, he apparently had no idea the GRU even existed before they pulled him in. That says a lot about how well they kept that secret.
And if you did break that secrecy, the consequences Suvorov mentions sound, well, horrific. He talks about some pretty gruesome ways they'd silence people. Definitely makes the point about how much they valued silence. This level of secrecy, it must have massively shaped how they actually found and recruited people, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Forget sending in a CV. Suvorov's clear. You just couldn't apply to the GRU. There was
Right.
no front door for an outsider. They weren't putting out job ads.
So, how did they find people? How did you get picked?
Suvorov says the first contact often happened within the military structure itself. He mentions these special departments. They could be anywhere, workplaces, train stations, army units, colleges. And this image keeps popping up. The door, covered in black leather. Sort of a subtle signpost.
That black leather door. Sounds straight out of a spy novel. Suvorov himself says he was picked up. What was his story there?
He talks about being noticed by Lieutenant General Obaturov, who was just a major back then. Obaturov basically saw something in him, some potential, and kind of mentored him into the GRU. It suggests recruitment was really personal. Someone spots you, sees loyalty, maybe sees someone who can help them climb as they climb, not just filling out forms.
Okay, so you get past the black leather door. What hits you then? The training sounds, well, more than just demanding.
Demanding is putting it mildly. Suvorov talks about finding these weird items labeled for training purposes only. Things like automatic rifles with holes drilled in them, even spoons with holes and writing on them. He wonders if they were tests, or maybe just a sign you were new to Spetsnaz. What do you make of those?
The drilled rifles, the spoons, it feels almost like psychological hazing, making you question everything right from the start. And the actual Spetsnaz exercises sound unbelievably harsh. Freezing fog, total exhaustion, combat drills that sound terrifyingly real, even using actual criminals as puppets. That's worlds away from normal army training. What was the point of pushing it that far?
It seems like they were building not just physical toughness, but massive psychological strength, resilience. Suvorov even mentions this acceptance that in wartime you might have to kill your own wounded comrades, a really grim thing to train for. It speaks to this deep focus on the mission above absolutely everything else, no matter how extreme.
Even their gear sounds purpose-built for that reality. The boots with soles put on backwards to confuse anyone tracking them. That's such a clever, sneaky detail. Really shows the focus on deception. And the clothing practical, maybe not comfy, but designed for long, hard operations.
Yeah, those reverse soles are a classic bit of tradecraft, aren't they? Really memorable. And the gear is all function over form, reflecting how tough the missions were expected to be. Suvorov also uses this powerful comparison. He says the way people acted inside the GRU was like dogs fighting to get accepted into a pack. What do you think of that?
The dog pack thing? Wow. It suggests this constant jostling for position, for status, proving yourself all the time. And then you have Colonel Kravtsov saying Spetsnaz soldiers are wild men, respecting people who don't hide their basic nature, distrusting anyone who seems too good. That's a pretty dark view of people, isn't it?
It is. It feels like a worldview forged in the fire of what they do, where, deception and violence are just tools of the trade.
Yeah.
And that mindset probably fed directly into how they operated, even in the early glimpses Suvorov gives us.
Yeah, we get a few peeks inside the 13th Army, different GRU teams working on different things, intelligence on lower units, electronic stuff, then putting it all together. The focus on activity charts seems really interesting.
Right, the activity charts, tracking enemy radio and radar signals. It shows how important it was just to understand patterns, even if you couldn't read the messages themselves. It's about building that big picture of what the enemy's up to, movements, readiness, that sort of thing. Passive intelligence, but vital.
And then the more active stuff, too, leaving fake footprints, practicing how to shake off surveillance, setting up dead drops like hiding an RPG in the mountains. These little bits give you a real feel for what they were actually doing day to day.
Exactly. It shows that mix of high-tech intel gathering and old-school spy techniques they used even then. Suvorov then talks about getting pulled deeper in, getting summoned to Moscow, entering the 10th Chief Directorate, the actual Aquarium. Sounds like a huge shift for him.
It really does. Having to cut off all past contacts, that just underlines how total the commitment was. In the GRU exam, he describes rapid-fire questions testing everything, not just facts, but your character, too. Sounds intense. The examiner's reacting strangely to his answers. Makes you wonder what they're really looking for.
Yeah, they were probably digging into his psychology, right? How he thinks under pressure, how adaptable he is, maybe even his stomach for the morally tricky decisions the spies have to make all the time. Getting accepted on August 23rd, becoming nomenklatura, which basically meant he was part of this privileged elite, untouchable by the KGB directly, that shows the GRU's unique power within the whole Soviet setup.
Life in the GRU dacha, though private rooms, good food sounds almost comfy compared to the brutal training. Quite a contrast.
That contrast could do a few things. Reward for getting through selection, maybe build loyalty, keep people happy.
Yeah.
And maybe also keep them contained in a comfortable but watched environment. But the GRU training school itself, he says, kept pushing. Memory training, physical limits, developing skills way beyond normal soldiering. It wasn't just training, it was about forging these exceptional human tools for espionage.
Which leads him into actually doing espionage, starting out in Vienna and Geneva. Getting a rough time from the GRU boss in Vienna sounds like another test. Even the task of moving Khrushchev's unwanted books feels weirdly significant somehow.
Could be, yeah. A test of obedience? Maybe. Doing pointless tasks without complaining. Important for a junior operative. But the real stuff started with recruiting agents at big exhibitions, like Telecom 75 in Geneva. Suvorov talks a lot about timing, doing reconnaissance beforehand. Why do you think the second day of an exhibition was key?
The second day, well, the initial buzz is over, right? So maybe it's easier to watch people properly, see who's really interested in specific things, who hangs around. You can spot potential targets without the huge crowds of opening day. And the recruitment dance he describes, the signals, the quick chat, the offer of cash, it's textbook spy stuff. Though he doesn't really gloss over the ethics of asking someone to betray their country.
No, that moral gray area is always there in spying, isn't it? Suvorov kind of presents it as part of the job, tied up with his own situation and what he saw in the recruits. He also talks about the immediate security drills after getting someone, covering tracks, using diplomatic cars if they could, getting the new agent away from the scene fast, always thinking about counterintelligence.
We also get these hints about the internal politics, the power plays, this navigator figure, the first deputy rising and falling, even noticing how the head cipher clerk acts as a sort of barometer for the mood. It paints a picture of a really complex internal world.
Absolutely. It shows the human side, the ambitions, the fears, the power games, all happening inside this super secret organization. Relying on tiny clues like the clerk's mood shows how important just watching and reading the dynamics was in that kind of hierarchy.
And then there were the outright dirty tricks, like that story with Vovka Fomichev and the Bible. Seems like a straight-up test of loyalty would he report something suspicious, with big consequences if he didn't. And just casually mentioning using diplomatic status as cover for spying reminds you how blurred those lines were.
Yeah, those incidents show how they were always testing, always watching their own people, demanding absolute loyalty. Spotting weaknesses was crucial. And diplomatic cover. Standard procedure in espionage gives you protection and helps you move around.
The excerpts kind of end on a cliffhanger, don't they? The military attaché getting pulled out, the first deputy being relocated, and Suvorov getting this important message talking about London feels like things are about to ramp up for him.
Definitely. Those final bits hint at bigger operations, Suvorov getting involved in more serious stuff, which, eventually leads to his defection later on.
So wrapping up this deep dive into these parts of Inside the Aquarium, what we've seen is this world built on just overpowering secrecy. Trust seems almost non-existent. Recruitment wasn't about applying, it was about being chosen. Training was designed to break you down and rebuild you into something else. And we got these early tastes of their operations, a mix of tech and classic spycraft, always wrapped in layers of deception. The difference from agencies we hear more about is really stark.
Yeah, for me, the big takeaways are things like that aquarium metaphor, not just locked in, but totally cut off, creating its own strange ecosystem. The reversed boot soles. Such a simple, brilliant example of their dedication to misdirection. And the psychological side of the Spetsnaz training really hammers home the kind of pressure they were under and the mindset they needed.
Thinking about it, you listening to this, you have to wonder about the sheer dedication involved, but also the immense psychological weight of living that kind of double life, surrounded by secrets and lies. What kind of personal cost does that have, operating constantly in the shadows like that?
And that leaves a final thought for you. Given how far they went for secrecy, the kind of training they did,
Yeah.
what does that suggest about the kinds of activities intelligence agencies like this undertake that we never see? What does it all tell us about how nations jostle for power and information, and maybe where the ethical lines get drawn or erased in that contest? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.